report to you on the results of the Canadian Arbitration Survey, which will be presented in the Canadian Arbitration Report 2023. What we're going to do today is give you highlights that will be in the report. We're not going to go through all of the report or all of the information, but give you what we thought were some interesting teaser data to get you interested, and we'll talk about the process that's going to be followed later. I'm Barry Leon, along with John Walker. We co-chaired the survey, and as most of you will know, we just did a survey for CanArbWeek last year, which saw our promotion for the survey. FTI Consulting handled the survey design and processing their survey team. There were 3 members of FTI who worked closely with 2 of them are here today. Natalie Quinn is the managing director beside me. Ali Ahmed is the senior managing director of the Canadian Health for Construction Projects, Assets, and Tara Singh, who many of you will know, is managing director of Canadian Lead Evaluations and Damages. The objective of the report is to point the way forward for us to build the practice of arbitration in Canada. Also, it will set a baseline for further research, so we will know in the future where we stood in the period 2020 to 2022, which was our survey period. The report will be made widely available, as we said at the outset, to anyone and everyone, and without charge. Janet, do you want to talk about the history of the report?
I'm always afraid to pick up that quickly. And again, this report has had a long and illustrious history. It began in all places, Perth, Australia, with the FTI, Western Australian Arbitration Report. And in 2021, in the sort of early days of what some people hoped would be the end of the pandemic, there was a conference, a live conference, with bizarre sort of people separated out, and the food was sort of on the table, you couldn't touch anyone. But they presented in March 2021 the Australian Arbitration Report, based on the sort of methodology from the Western Australian Report, and now presented by the Australian Centre for International Commercial Arbitration. I had the great good fortune to be there, and I said, hey, this is good, we need that. And so a fair bit of time passed, because actually sort of aligning the stars during COVID was not so easy. But eventually, FTI came on board, and I'm delighted to say rather enthusiastically, because I can tell you, as much work as it was from the lawyer side of it, it has been a huge effort on the part of FTI, and they've really done great service in supporting this initiative. Bringing it to Canada and sort of co-opting a frequent partner in crime, Barry Leon, he said right away, well, this is not so simple. Those questions work for the Aussies, but they're not questions for Canadians. We need to get a questionnaire that will work for us. I said, okay. I said it rather sort of anxiously, because there I was hoping that FTI would just disseminate the survey questions and we'd be in business. But no. So Barry, being the very sort of broad and consultative, and
I wasn't interested in arbitration in the outback. So.
Yes, the very.
Now, hang on a second. I am Australian, so careful.
So the challenge was then to figure out what were the right questions. Of course, we could sit, together and kind of puzzle through. But very quite sensibly said, we need to go out to the community and find out what everyone thinks will be of most use. And so we immediately established a steering committee. I want to say a number of the members of the steering committee are here, and we expect to see them through the week. Artem Barsukov from Meta Jones, Eric Godard from Woods, Rachel Howie from Denton's, Hugh Meehan from BLG, Alexander Mitrotonis from Fasken, Johnny Sertani from Crown Office Chambers, and Lauren Tomasi from Ulster. And it was great discussing the ideas with them and getting their take on the kinds of themes and focus, the interest of the survey that we should develop. But to get the questions right, again, that's a huge challenge, and for anybody who's done a survey, you have to think once, twice, 3, 4 times. If you ask this question, what answer will you get, and will it be helpful for you? Will it help you look at the kinds of things that interest you most? And from that, we developed focus groups, and so now we're in the sort of mid-June of 2022, and a number of you, I won't sort of try to name everyone, but a number of you who are here today will recall coming online and chatting with us about specific questions, and again, also specific sort of areas for exploration. Thank you very much to all of you. And again, those who remember our first in-person CanArbWeek last year in Montreal, on the Monday of that, on the first day of that week, which wasn't a Monday, was it? It's all there, I'm sorry. But on the first day of CanArbWeek last year, we launched the survey, and the questionnaire became available. And then we met what was, again, our next big challenge. And to be fair, FTI said, we will support you all the way, but getting arbitrators and counsel to actually respond to the survey, that's going to be your job. So again, Barry and I can only write so many emails bugging people, so often for that. So we want to also say thank you to so many of you who actually helped to share the message and prompt colleagues, and also to answer the questionnaire yourself, which was not a short one. We understand that it actually required a little bit of investigation of your own records and some serious time in responding to the questions. But the other challenge that we faced was we wanted to get a sense for the practice, the current practices of arbitrators based in Canada, of experts, and of counsel. And the challenge with counsel, of course, is that you're likely to get several counsel in the same case and several counsel reporting on their own law firms. And wouldn't it be helpful if the counsel reporting on one law firm, several of them, would actually have the same numbers when they talk about how many people are in the firm and how many offices they have. So that challenge was addressed through the idea of point persons. And we did have, and I apologize again, I haven't got specific names of the people, but point persons came forward from Blake's, BLG, Chernos Flaherty, Davies, Denton's Canada, Fasken, Glayholt, Max O'Sullivan, McCarthy Tetrell, McMillan, Norton Rose, Osler, Steigman, and Torres, all to give us single sort of definitive answers about the practice of the firm, leaving the other questions for individual counsel that they were able to answer from their own perspective in their own practices. And that data collection went on for most of the first half of 2023, and eventually we said, we hate to cut it off now because we're still getting in some surveys. Eventually we did because we knew that unless we wound up the survey, the data collection, we would never get into the next huge challenge, data analysis and the development of the report. And now I'm going to turn it over to Natalie to tell us more about that process of the data management analysis. If I can put this. Yes, so that you will know how the data was handled and how it was developed for the report.
Okay, thanks, Janet. So we surveyed 3 groups, the arbitrators, counsel, and experts that are involved in arbitration. And it was only those that were based in Canada. So the disputes or the parties or the arbitration seat could be elsewhere, but we were only surveying practitioners here in Canada. And we wanted to encompass all commercial arbitration activity, including investor-state. And for that, as Barry mentioned, it was for those that were taking place between January 2020 to 2022. So we wanted to make sure we had good representation of activity, and we thought that 3-year period would be a long enough period for us to sort of gauge what trends we were seeing in arbitration activity and what growth we were seeing. So with the assistance of the FTI survey team, we tailored there were basically 3 surveys that we tailored and built the 3 online platforms. And unlike the Australian survey that Janet mentioned, we didn't call for very detailed information. Like the Australian survey, people were actually giving very detailed information on specific cases. But we sought more high-level information just so we could gauge trends in Canada. So, however, to ensure data integrity, we did put some detail in the structure of the survey. So, for example, if a respondent answered one question with a certain number of cases, 100 cases they worked on, then we just had to make sure that the remaining questions were linked to that 100 cases, just so we didn't actually have a mismatch of information. And, so basically the survey was locked. You couldn't actually move forward unless you were matching your data to your prior questions. But overall, the survey period was about 8 months. We just wanted to make sure that we had enough respondents. As Janet and Barry said, there was a lot of following up just to get, we appreciate that, yes, it did take a lot of time for people to actually fill out the survey. But ultimately, we did go over like 120 practitioners, so that was fabulous. And it provided us with insights about, great insights of the arbitration practice across Canada. So, as part of the process, we also looked to preserving confidentiality. So, whilst we didn't actually call, as part of the survey, we didn't actually call for people to actually enter in any personal information or their names or anything like that, but just to make sure that confidentiality was preserved, we had a double-blind system. So, it was the FTI survey team that was collating all the information, including the information that came directly from the firms for their firm-wide data also. So, and then it wasn't until they had collated that information, generated the results, that they then provided it to our team for us to look at the data and look to analyse that information. So after gathering that data, we've done some preliminary analysis. We did some preliminary analysis. We got together with Janet and Barry here to identify the areas of interest, which we'll touch on today with some of the slides here. There's also to clarify any unexpected results that we saw too. But based on these discussions, we then identified what we wanted to include in the report, what would be of interest to all, to then prepare our report. So what we sort of found is that that the Canadian arbitration industry is increasingly it is growing, and corporates and practitioners are turning to arbitration as a means of resolving disputes. And further, the field of arbitration in Canada is diverse, so we can see that in some of the slides here today. And the use of arbitration, though, historically has been concentrated in things like construction and mining disputes, etc. We're seeing this diversifying into other sectors as well. So I'll hand it over to Barry and Janet to prepare a snapshot of some of the results.
Go on.
So what we're going to talk about next is just quickly, the demographic of the respondents. Probably nothing surprising in this. So a lot of the slides you will never be able to read. It's not our intention to read them. We're going to talk to them a little bit. It will happen in the report, and you will be able to both see them and think about them. So what this slide essentially says is that, and this probably isn't a surprise, more than 1/2 of the arbitrators, so that's arbitrators, not counsel, who participated in the survey, 63% were based in Toronto. However, only 26% of the respondents were counsel, and 34% of the experts were in Toronto, and followed by, in terms of size, by Calgary, Montreal, and Vancouver. Overall, the 49% of the respondents were arbitrators, 34% for counsel and 17% for experts. So some of the data you will see we kept separate because we thought it's interesting, well, in part because it's a different population leading it, so their experiences may be different. So some of the data you'll see will be separate. In some cases, what we're going to show is data taken from one of essentially the two groups at the very end from the expert group. This will make more sense, I think, when we get there. The next slide is going to be trends.
Gary, how did you decide the antibodies from arbitrary impact?
We asked them to do 2 surveys, and some did. Some didn't. And we don't know who, so we can't call anybody out. So this slide is trends in arbitration counsel practices. And what we looked at here, and I think this is interesting, those in law firms particularly may find it interesting. We looked at what's happening in arbitration counsel practices. Are the arbitration practices of Canadian law firms growing based on lawyer headcount? And that's what this slide is dealing with, is headcount. So anybody who's self-identified as being in arbitration, or doing arbitration as part of the practice.
So this is not how much work they got. This is how many people are working in arbitration cases.
So when you do your marketing, say you've got a large team, this is the people that you would include in that number. So the chart is the percentage growth of lawyers in Canadian law firms who are practicing arbitration. And the 2 bars, and you'll see this in a number of cases, we have 2 bars showing different things. So in this one, the navy bar, the darker bar, shows the overall changes in firms' arbitration practices, while the lighter bar shows the changes in their international arbitration practices. So overall, the number of lawyers engaged in arbitration counsel work in Canada either remained unchanged, so that's 40% of the firms, or grew somewhere between 10 and 24%. That's 29% of the firms, so just under a third. And 17% of the firms grew more than 25%. And then you have a few at the right-up side, increased by over 50%. And the last column doubled or more than doubled. Janet, do you want to talk to
This pie chart is all about how much work, how many cases counsel are doing. And we thought this was kind of interesting because we're looking ultimately for trends, and if I could just say, if we could give you just a little bit of a heads up, we're kind of hoping that FTI will have enough patience to consider working with us again in the future, because we'd really like to take these as sort of baselines and see where we're going, to see if we can really sort of track progress. But there are ways in which I would suggest there's sort of glimmers of progress already that I would suggest. This is one of them. We asked, this is 2020 to 2023. So, like folks, that was a pandemic time. So you'd expect everybody's, or many people's practices to collapse generally. And the fact that there's any sort of advance during that time, I think should be taken as some encouragement. So in fact, during the past 3 years, 24% said they experienced some decrease in their arbitration work. 34% said they had about the same amount of work. But 42% said their work had increased. This is over the last 3 years. So think about that. I think that's pretty exciting. And some of them, these are a little sort of gray, green, and sort of teal. The little parts of that. Those folks were saying the work has substantially increased. And I think the teal one is sort of double or more than double. So these are people who've had a real increase in the number of cases, notwithstanding over the last 3 years, notwithstanding. I think that's pretty exciting. And then So here's where it gets
All that surprising, Toronto most often, followed by Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary in that order. Perhaps more interesting is when asked why a particular city was recommended. Convenience for the parties was most important when Toronto was recommended, while for Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver, client preference was the dominant factor, particularly in the case of Vancouver. Perhaps that's something that we attractiveness of Vancouver to clients. Having suitable hearing facilities, which to many of us is important, was a factor only in Toronto. The next slide is our ever-old friend, the question of ad hoc or institutional. And on this slide, we see the respective use and its use in contracts. The use in contracts of ad hoc or institutional arbitration in Canada. The chart shows the percentage of institutional clauses in contracts. So the question, in what percentage of contracts in which an arbitration clause was included in the contract was an institution chosen to administer the arbitration? And so you can see on here, and perhaps just looking at the extreme right of the graph, in 41% of respondents said that they would choose institutional in 76 to 100% of the time. And then as you work your way left, you get the same answer. The 41% was international. Domestic, that figure is 20%. So 20% of respondents said they would choose an institution 76 to 100% of the time. The highest bar for domestic contracts is the one that would say 27% of respondents said they would choose or recommend an institution 26 to 50% of the time. We haven't tried to draw any further conclusions from this data, but it may prove to be interesting, particularly as, for example, VANIAC promotes itself and gets stronger as ADRIC takes on its reform role and so forth. What are the people who are making the recommendations going to be saying about choosing or not choosing an institution? And we assumed, we didn't ask this question, we didn't ask the question about appointing authorities choosing an institution just as an appointing authority, but that may be in the future something that will be of interest.
So the next question you'll ask is, if they chose an institution, which institution? And my impression is, at this point, the baseline will probably not surprise most of the people here. So in international contracts, it was the most commonly chosen institution was the ICC, and it was followed by the AAA, ICPR, and ADRIC. And for domestic cases, by contrast, the most commonly chosen institution was ADRIC, followed by ADR Chambers and VANIAC. Very interesting to watch this space over the next few years and to see if there are shifts and changes in that. And then the next question, and this is, in some ways not surprising, but interesting question. The parties, did they provide for a tribunal of 1 or 3 arbitrators? And this was quite divergent between domestic and international cases. In international cases, 37% of counsel said that they recommended panels of 3 on more than half the occasion on which they were asked to do so. But in domestic contracts, only 13% said they recommended panels of 3 on more than half the occasions. The other chart is why did you recommend a sole arbitrator and not panel 3? And it was most often for reasons of cost, but also because in some cases the case was small, or appointing a sole arbitrator was thought to be likely to promote efficiency.
There's two distinct charts on this slide. Let me talk first to the one on the left. So the heading is who appoints. And so we see that Canadian, and it has a bar of domestic and a bar, again, the darker bar is domestic, the lighter bar is international. And Canadian arbitrator respondents in the survey reported that they were appointed in domestic cases 25% of the time by claimants, 19% by respondents. So if you total that, it's by far the largest number of called party appointments. The second highest bar, it's the highest bar on the chart, but treating claimants, respondents as parties, is 30% in joint appointments. And with a shout out to Bill Horton, who noticed that originally we didn't have in the survey joint appointments, and because it's a significant factor, we were encouraged and did amend the survey early on so that was one of the options. So you see that in domestic cases, 30% of the time the parties get together and jointly appoint the tribunal. Internationally, and this may not be a surprise, institutions provide the largest proportion of appointments, that's 34%, followed 30% by the parties. Again, that's totaling the respondents and the claimants together, and 22% by co-arbitrators. The chart on the right, which is headed how often Canadians are appointed, comes from the council survey. And the question was, what percentage of the time did you recommend Canadians to be appointed as arbitrators? And so, starting at the extreme right, 48% of council would recommend a Canadian 76 to 100% of the time. And next to that, the same 22% of council would recommend a Canadian 26 to 50% of the time. Probably need to think more about the implications of that, but that's the information that was reported by council in the survey. The next question will be of interest, I think, and that is appointing former judges. The survey asked about the appointment of former judges, and not surprisingly, the first observation is it occurs much more in domestic cases than in international cases. Joint appointments in domestic cases were of former judges 30% of the time. And if you total the claimant and respondents together, the parties appointed former judges 44% of the time. Arbitral institutions did so 15% of the time, and the co-arbitrators did so 6% of the time. Internationally, in international cases, the institutions appointed judges, former judges, 34% of the time. The parties, 30%, co-arbitrators, 22% of the time, and joint appointments, which of course are less common in international cases, were 12% of the time. Got it?
So in case you're thinking this is getting to be a little bit deep in detail, the next question is about hourly rates. Have I got your attention? We were really surprised with this because, in fact, those bars, I think the first one is sort of 200 to 300, 400, 500, and so on. The last big bar is 900, and you'll see nothing with 1,000 plus. But the really interesting thing is what an even spread across the range. So it's not like a single sort of, price point is leading the way. It's even across the range. And then, of course, the next question that will be most on your minds is, what is the impact on appointments? And indeed, this was really quite interesting because we did find it does matter. It's not the only factor, but it does matter to parties. So that's really sort of the best conclusion I think that we can draw from this is it affected choices some of the time, and by that I think we have to take into account there are many factors that go into choosing an arbitrator, but it wasn't money is no object by any stretch. So just an interesting point for everyone to think about. I suppose
It didn't take account of the size of the cases.
no, that's right. So it didn't say, oh, money's no object in this case, but in that case, it's everything. And so there's a lot more that could be examined on it, but I've also been cautioned that I should be careful about drawing any very detailed conclusions in cases it's understood to be some form of price fixing. I don't see that at all, but it's just very interesting to see that huge range of hourly rates. But another thing that, at least I think has been shown to be of interest to many people in Canada, and that is diversity in arbitration. And there's a really interesting story to tell here. I'm going to tell this story, a caveat right now, through gender diversity, and then I'll say a few words about diversity of other sort of backgrounds of people in just a moment. So let's look at this. For council, among the council survey, wait a second, I got this backwards. Among the council survey, there were 32% who identified as women. There were, among the expert survey, only 27%. So almost a third in the council survey were actually women, and just a little bit over 1 in 4 were women in the expert survey. So again, better representation among council than among experts. Let's look ahead because, I mean, there's no sort of automatic, or inevitable play on this, but today there seems to be a progression towards arbitrator. Not very many people sort of come out of their educational background and pushing towards arbitrator right away. So in fact, we asked people, if you look on the right side, what was your main professional background? We asked the arbitrators who were answering the survey. And the vast majority, you see that 2/3 of the people said, my main professional background in coming into the work as arbitrator was as a counsel, was as a lawyer. And it is specified counsel, but I would imagine they were engaged in counsel work. So the interesting part here is that when you look then at the arbitrator survey, fewer than 1 in 5 who answered the survey identified as women. Another interesting part, almost 1 in 4. They had almost a quarter of the cases though, even though they're fewer than 1 in 5. Less than 20%, almost 25% who had a work that they had. So women, it would seem at the moment, seem to be getting a disproportionate amount of the work per arbitrator, which is always very encouraging personally to hear. But it just suggests that people are actually thinking of appointing women arbitrators, which is exciting. But again, let's put these charts together because if the most common professional background is as counsel, when we go back, we see that far more than 1 in 5 who answered as counsel practicing arbitration were women. So that suggests that the pipeline is building. Now, I don't want to make too much of this, but because of course, women who are counsel, they go on to do other things, not be arbitrators. But if that is the main source in Canada of arbitrators, then there is hope to think that even though we haven't got longitudinal studies, there is some indication of growth, of some indication of promise for growth. Now, once again, the other big caveat, we did study other kinds of diversity, not just gender diversity. And although I've not presented the slides here, we've got a lot more data analysis to do on them. I will say that my impression from the data so far is that, number one, diversity of other sorts, other historically underrepresented people in the field are far behind women in terms of recognition, engagement, participation. But I will say that there is also an indication about, of promise in that data, that there is some sort of growth. And, just anecdotally, in other fields in arbitration, there has seemed to have been encouraging signs as well. Although, again, lots more work to do in that area than for gender diversity. So back to you.
Next two slides that I'm going to talk to deal with the industries that are using arbitration. And again, you won't be able to read this, but I'll give you the highlights. So the first slide, and the one I'll talk to first, it comes from the arbitrator survey. So this is looking at the cases, the industries and the cases that arbitrators have. The next one will be that counsel has. And there's a slight difference, it may not be significant. The tallest bar in both the international and domestic arbitration data is not an industry at all, but we included, along with all the industries, cases that focused on contract interpretation. And so internationally, let me just get that right. The tallest bar in both international and domestic cases is contract interpretation. So setting that aside, because it's not an industry, but not surprisingly, because so many of the arbitrations do involve contract interpretation. Internationally, the second tallest bar, or the largest actual industry sector, is construction, engineering, and infrastructure, and which comes third domestically. And internationally, the third tallest, or greatest number, is manufacturing distribution. And domestically, the third highest or tallest is corporate shareholder, joint venture, partnership disputes, which comes fourth internationally. So we haven't focused on this enough to know whether the conclusion is going to be that there isn't a significant difference in what Canadian arbitrators are saying when it comes to industries, or maybe there is more to it, but we need to look more carefully at that. Turning to the next, and it's laid out somewhat differently. The next slide comes from the council survey. And what it's showing is that again, probably not surprising, the largest international industries involved were mining, 21%, followed by banking, finance, and private equity, 18%. And then this category, contract interpretation, comes up as 12%. Domestically, contract interpretation was the greatest number, 26%. And then leaving that aside, followed by construction, engineering, and infrastructure at 20%, and corporate shareholder joint venture partnership at 15%. Again, the differences between the two groups, obviously just based on the people responding to the survey and their work experience or case levels. And that is about as much as we can discern at this point. The next slide that I'm going to talk to is the amounts in dispute. And the ranges went from under $100,000 to $100 billion plus, And then there's a column at the right, which is significant
Mary, I
non.
think that's 100 million.
So what did I say?
Billion.
Sorry?
100 billion.
No, I said million. At least I thought it. I intended to say million. Just, the column on the right is a significant non-monetary relief claim. So in the domestic cases, by the tall dark blue bars, the vast majority of the cases, you get 29% at the 100,000 to a million and 31% at the 1 to 5 million. And then they, as you get larger cases, not surprisingly, the bars get smaller. In the international cases, which is the turquoise, the greatest number of percentage of cases fell in the $20 million to $100 million range, followed by the 1 to 5 million, and then the 5 to 20 million. You could add these up in different ways to present different pictures. Again, not sure if there is more to be discerned from analyzing it. What I should say, and we'll say it again when we get to the end, but as once the survey comes out and everybody has a chance to look at it, we don't have the exclusivity on analyzing some of this information at all. So we're hoping that people in the Canadian arbitration community will look at it and say, well, you drew this and that conclusion, but you could draw this other conclusion. And I think that will be part of the interactive process as we go forward.
And in fact, one of our really central purposes for this was to provide all of the practitioners, all of those who are engaged in trying to build arbitration in Canada, whether they're counsel or, whether counsel recommending arbitration, counsel practicing arbitration, or arbitrators, or experts, or tribunal assistants, or academics. Give them data that will help to support their efforts to make a case for more resources or more focus on arbitration. And so in that light, the duration of the main evidentiary hearing has been cited in many places as one of the strategic benefits of arbitration, that for those of you who know sort of large cases that go on for weeks and weeks and weeks in court, you know how expensive and challenging that can be. When you look at the counsel and the arbitrator survey, you see there's some variations in their experience of how long the hearings are, but in both cases, the majority of the hearings were between 1 day and 2 weeks. From the arbitrator's question?
For the no hearing column, were those 4 cases that settled and never went to hearing, or were the parties agreed not to hold hearings?
I don't know if we asked whether those are cases that they said should be in writing, or whether they were cases that were settled. I think there were cases that were. No, so there's a series of cases from the council survey that were where there was no hearing, and I think there were cases that were done in writing. But
yeah, that would be my recollection. Those would be hearings that done in writing. We can verify that.
Yeah, we should. And questions like that are really, really helpful. And I think you see that happens far more frequently in domestic cases than in international cases. But where there was a hearing, you can see in both situations, beyond the 2-week mark, it tails off significantly. So those of you who are speaking to clients, you're looking ahead at this dispute, and you're saying, or a dispute that might arise in the business relationship, and you're saying, well, that could go on, like, go on and on, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, or longer in court. Know that the data on this is that generally hearings in arbitration are shorter. And then just as another, sort of the use of mediation in arbitration, it was, this is from the council survey, where the parties engaged in formal mediation in international arbitrations, This occurred in 2/3 of the cases before the arbitration was commenced, and only in 1/3 of the cases during the arbitration before the award was released. However, in domestic cases, where they had an arbitration agreement, in 85% of the cases, the parties engaged in formal mediation before the arbitration, and in only 15% of the cases that they undertook it later. So, whether that provides you with a little bit of support for a case for how an arbitration agreement might actually, promote some a sensible approach to dispute resolution, one in which there might actually be a mediated result. That's something that you might want to draw from this data. Yeah.
We also looked at expert evidence, and you see on this chart the results from 2 of the surveys. On the left, the expert survey, and the right, the council survey. So it's the subject matters on which expert evidence was tendered. Some of it obviously is not, maybe all of it's not surprising, but clearly in both surveys, damages was most commonly, and again, the dark color is domestic, the lighter blue is international. So in domestic cases, most frequently in both surveys it shows, and very similar percentages, 35%, 33% being damages. Internationally, it's 28% in one survey, 31% in the other. Then the other topics, which may be of more interest, because we all know that damages is a common subject of expert evidence. Construction delay in both surveys, roughly in the range of 10 to 15%. Industry practice evidence, again, not huge differences either between the 2 surveys or between international and domestic. So internationally, the experts had 19%, the others 23%, and again, a 4% difference on the right side of the council survey. Again, probably this isn't a surprise, and I'm not even sure how you have expert evidence. I guess in domestic cases, I guess it'd be expert evidence of foreign law, and so the 32%. Internationally, for obvious reasons, you have more often expert evidence on law, and that's 118, the other 14%. And then other technical evidence, roughly hovering in the 15 to 25% range. What conclusions we draw from it, or what the expert firms draw from it, we've yet to figure out, but it does show, present somewhat of a picture of the ways in which expert evidence is being used in arbitration by the population surveyed.
Were these charts not to scale?
Were these charts not to scale?
Because, like if you look on the damages side, 35%.
No, they're not.
The total amount, 6% is higher than 7%. The other.
I think you're right that the data sets are not on the same scale, so the numbers are still correct when it comes to domestic along each of the categories.
Data sets.
So domestic versus international.
For other, where it's 6% is higher than 7%.
Yeah, so the percentages are comparing for all domestic, those are on one scale, and for international on another. But for the report, I agree with you that well,
It's totally misleading.
Yes.
We just had a multi-chart proofreader.
We've just got the sort of data. We're just trying to say something about it that we can.
Only my idea of the same time.
Okay, proofreading committee, we have Paul.
Paul's taking the proofreading. Any other volunteers?
All through planning CanArbWeek, anytime anybody said anything, Paul would say, you suggested you on it, so.
That's good to say that you're hoisting me in my own guitar.
Yeah, so we're down, you'll be pleased to know, to our last data slide. And it's the one that I find the most encouraging. User satisfaction. Now, again, a disclaimer, we didn't have any quote-unquote users, so we needed to use council as the proxy. How happy are your clients with arbitration? And 82% said they were satisfied or very satisfied with their experience in arbitration, which is so encouraging because it gives us reason to hope that they will recommend it to their clients for other contracts, other situations. And the most common reasons for their satisfaction was the efficiency of the process and the fact that they felt that they had a fair hearing, irrespective of the outcome. And I just think that that's really good news because it says, when it comes down to it, when the arbitrations actually come forward, we're maybe doing some of the right things, which is good to know. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone to Ali, and he's going to give us some wonderful wrap-up.
Thank you, Janet. So thank you all for your attention throughout the presentation on the highlights of the Canadian Arbitration Report for 2023. Reporting the results of the survey of arbitration practitioners in Canada. We hope you found the insights and the data both insightful and informative. As we said earlier, you will find a lot more information, further insights in the report that's due to release in the coming weeks. The report will be made widely available, and the charts will be corrected. After that, we look forward to opportunities, particularly Janet and Barry, to discuss the report with all the sectors of the Canadian arbitration community. As we conclude, we'd like to reflect on the importance of the insights gained through the survey. Arbitration is a vital component of Canada's legal landscape, and understanding perspectives and practices of those who work in this field is essential for continued growth and success. The report will illuminate various trends, as you've seen today, among various arbitration practitioners, shedding lights on topics such as preferred arbitral institutions, diversity in arbitration members, and ongoing challenges and opportunities in this sector. The other thing that Barry noted earlier is that the intent is for this to set a baseline against which we can measure progress and changes in the coming years. I think that's the big takeaway. As we move forward, we encourage you all to consider the implications of the survey results in your own practices and work, whether you're an arbitrator, counsel, expert, arbitral secretary, academic, or other user of arbitration services. It's important to acknowledge the dedication and hard work of the entire research team who made the survey and the report possible, and of course the willingness of respondents who shared the results. Their collective efforts have enriched our understanding of this vital aspect of dispute resolution in Canada. In closing, we express our gratitude to all of you who are present here today, and your interest in this topic and your engagement with our presentation is truly appreciated. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or wish to discuss in more detail if you have the opportunity to review it. Barry, do you have anything else to add?
I don't. I think that sorry, you missed the last item on your notes that we got a reception. Oh, you want to? Oh, questions. Paul, do you have more questions? Lisa? Anybody have any questions or observations? We may not be able to answer the questions, or things that you think we should be looking at as we do more analysis.
I think that for the future, we'd like to remove contract interpretation. Because I don't think we're going to get a real fair and apple farming in any one of the industry sectors, so they've got contract interpretation.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask.
It's a very good question. In fact, no matter how many times you go over the questions, you can never be 100% sure that you won't get answers that say, oh, we asked the wrong question, or we didn't ask it. That's not right. So I think they were free to select more than one. So it's not just that this is the most important issue in the case of contract interpretation. Hard to imagine commercial arbitration involves some contract interpretation, but there we are. So, but again, not only is it an opportunity for a baseline, but we will find that other questions will be interesting, but also that we'll have a chance to ask some of these questions again, perhaps, refine and
I just can't remember. I mean, I think we would have thought of that problem, and so I tend to think that it may have been a question where you could give more than one response. Good. Okay, so that's the answer. It could be a construction case involved contract interpretation versus technical dollars. Good chance to go.
Well, I just want to say, I don't know whether anyone else is planning to say this, but it's just a very impressive piece of work, I think, and a tremendous contribution to arbitration, commercial arbitration in Canada. I have to say I was a bit skeptical about it at the beginning, but the results are, to me, you can always have a discussion about a survey, and surveys have to be taken in context, and they're living things, and they really serve a useful purpose when you can compare surveys to each other and so on. But as conversation starters, they're terrific. I fear that if we actually got a conversation going about this survey now, we would never make it to our reception. That's not to shut off anyone else, but I'm just saying that. I'm speaking for myself. I have lots of things to say about it. But generally speaking, it does confirm a lot of things that many of us felt intuitively. We always have to say, I think the arbitration is really increasing here. I'm basing that on numbers of arbitrators, I'm basing that on my own experience and so on and so forth. But to have this kind of general support for that, as well as a breakdown of the areas of activity and so on, I think contract interpretation is a really important topic to cover. I don't even think there's a problem with the charts. I think that the bars show absolute numbers and the percentages show comparison across the state. So even in that respect, I congratulate.
thank you very much, Bill. I think we all agree. But in the course of that, I thought I also heard a motion to adjourn.
I was just before you adjourn, Bill reminded me that there are people that put a lot of work into completing the survey, Bill being one of them, E4J being another person who had, for whatever reason, they ran into glitches and they persevered. They just didn't say, screw it, we're done. They came back to us until we got the problem sorted out. And that's what hopefully means that this data has a greater reliability. People really work to contribute. I think Ali was going to say a closing word about it.
That's all. Just thank you all, and we wish you all a great time at the welcome reception. It's sponsored by our friends at Kroll.